The moment the cabin lights dimmed, and the engines hummed beneath the crowded flight, no one noticed the tired, worn-out man sinking silently into seat 12. His backpack was frayed, his shoes dusty, and his eyes carried the weight of years lived too fast. The flight attendant brushed past him without looking. Passengers pressed forward impatiently, and even the man sitting beside him scooted away as if poverty were contagious. But none of them knew that the quiet, exhausted single father in seat 12F once had a call sign known across the sky, a name that F-22 pilots would one day salute midair. They didn't know that the man they were ignoring had once saved lives without expecting a thank you, had flown missions that demanded more courage than most people would ever touch, and had given up everything for the tiny girl sleeping against his chest. They didn't know he had come aboard this flight not as a hero, but as a father desperate to protect the only family he had left. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and silent heroes who walk among us every day, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to Soul Tale. Your support helps us bring more heart-touching stories like this. His name was Ethan Cole, but no one on the flight cared who he used to be. They only saw an exhausted father holding a 3-year-old girl with tangled hair, her clothes slightly faded, clutching her little teddy bear. To most, he looked like just another struggling parent making travel uncomfortable for everyone else. But behind the quiet gentleness of his touch and the tenderness with which he tucked a blanket around his daughter, a storm of memories lived in him, memories of roaring skis, disciplined formations, and the sharp voice in his headset calling, "Eagle 7, cleared to engage." That was years ago, before life pulled him down from the sky and slammed him hard onto the ground. When his wife passed unexpectedly, leaving him alone with their infant daughter, Ethan walked away from his decorated career without hesitation. Freedom, medals, and aircraft meant nothing compared to a single soft cry from the tiny face he loved more than life itself. Years passed, and Ethan worked every job he could find: mechanic, delivery driver, warehouse loader. Each shift left his hands rough, his back tight, and his heart constantly torn between survival and fatherhood. But he never complained. Every night he rocked his daughter Lily to sleep, promising her a better future even if he didn't know how to build it. This flight, the one where he sat in seat 12F being dismissed by everyone around him, was supposed to take them toward that hope. He had finally secured a small job near a military base that offered daycare support for former service members. It wasn't glamorous, just maintenance work, but it meant stability, something Lily had never truly known. Still, every step forward seemed met with new difficulties. He had scraped together the money for these tickets by selling his few remaining medals and taking extra night shifts. No one knew that the backpack under his feet held the folded flag from his wife's funeral, a small photo of Lily as a baby, and the last piece of his past. His old pilot patch with the call sign Eagle 7 stitched in fatting thread. As the aircraft climbed into the clouds, Lily stirred, whimpering softly, and Ethan rocked her gently. People sighed, rolled their eyes, and looked away as though her tiny cries were a burden. Ethan whispered apologies even though no one cared to hear them. He held her close, trying to hide the trembling fatigue in his arms. He hadn't slept properly in days, and his heartbeat felt heavy with the pressure of everything he was holding together. The flight attendant finally approached him, not with kindness but with irritation, telling him to keep his daughter quiet. Ethan nodded respectfully, swallowing the sting of shame. He had been judged many times since leaving the Air Force, judged for being poor, judged for being a single father, judged for looking like a man who had fallen behind in life. Yet no one knew the battles he had fought, both in the sky and within his own heart. As the plane approached cruising altitude, a sudden announcement crackled through the cabin, and passengers rushed to the windows with excitement. Two F-22 Raptors were flying alongside the commercial plane, sleek and sharp against the blue sky. People cheered, took photos, and marveled loudly. Ethan, however, froze. His breath caught in his throat as he held Lily close, unable to look away from the fighters gliding like silent guardians beside them. He recognized the markings. He recognized the formation. He knew exactly who they belonged to. His heart began to pound as memories surged, training sessions on scorching runways, the adrenaline of soaring 30,000 feet above Earth, the sharp turns that tested every muscle in his body. These were his people, his world, the sky that had once held him like a second home. Then something extraordinary happened. One of the F-22s dipped slightly, maneuvering into a flank where Ethan could see the pilot's helmet clearly. The pilot lifted a gloved hand and tapped twice on his visor, a symbolic gesture, one reserved for acknowledging a respected call sign. Ethan felt his eyes burn. He hadn't heard his call sign spoken aloud in years. He hadn't expected anyone to remember him, let alone honor him. But the pilot's gesture was unmistakable. It was a salute directed at him. Word spread in the cockpit of the F-22s, Eagle 7 was on board. One of their legends, a man who had mentored younger pilots, who had once risked his aircraft to shield another from a missile lock, who had always flown with courage that inspired every person in his squadron. And here he was, sitting quietly among strangers who didn't know his worth. Moments later, the plane's captain made a sudden announcement, his voice filled with respect instead of standard formality. He addressed the passengers, explaining that an honored former Air Force pilot was traveling with them, a man whose service had saved lives. Shock rippled through the cabin. People turned to look at Ethan with widened eyes, realizing the truth they had overlooked. The man in seat 12F wasn't just a struggling father. He was someone who had once defended their country, someone who had carried responsibility few could comprehend. Ethan lowered his eyes, overwhelmed, wishing he could disappear, not wanting attention, only wanting his daughter to rest peacefully. But the respect didn't end there. Through the window, the F-22s shifted into a formation known only to pilots, a silent aerial salute. They tilted their wings in perfect symmetry, a gesture never performed lightly and almost never done for a commercial flight. Passengers gasped as the fighters flew alongside them gracefully, honoring a man who had been forgotten by the world but remembered by the sky. Ethan felt something inside him crack, the years of exhaustion, the loneliness, the silent sacrifices. For the first time in a long while, he felt seen, not as a struggling father or a poor traveler, but as a human being who had once given everything he had. The rest of the flight transformed. The same passengers who had ignored him now offered help, smiles, snacks for Lily, warm words, anything they could give to ease the weight he carried. The flight attendant who had spoken harshly earlier approached with tears in her eyes, apologizing softly, bringing extra blankets and water. Ethan accepted it all quietly, humbly, knowing he hadn't done anything to deserve special treatment. He had simply lived his truth. But kindness, when it arrives unexpectedly, can heal years of silent wounds. When the plane finally landed, airport staff and ground crew stood waiting near the gate. Some saluted him, others nodded respectfully, and one even handed Lily a small toy plane. Ethan stepped off the aircraft with his daughter in his arms, not as an invisible man but as someone whose story had reminded people that heroes don't always wear uniforms. Sometimes they wear tired shoes and carry children instead of weapons. Yet deep down, Ethan didn't feel like a hero. He felt like a father doing his best, and perhaps that was the greatest courage of all.